When I was a kid, I wasn't exactly the poster child for obedience. Rules felt like chains, and I broke them with glee. I'd stay up past my bedtime, flashlight tucked under the covers, devouring books I wasn't supposed to read. I'd sneak cookies from the jar when my parents weren't looking, crumbs dusting my pajamas as I crept back to my room. And when I was in a particularly foul mood, I'd take my sister's Barbie dolls and rip their heads off, leaving their plastic bodies strewn across the floor like a crime scene. My dad used to joke, half serious, that I was on a path to becoming the next Jeffrey Dahmer. Thankfully, I didn't end up like that, but my antics pushed my parents to their breaking point. They weren't the strict type. Punishing me broke their hearts, so they turned to an unconventional method, one most would call a step too far. It was a method born of desperation, rooted in my dad's encyclopedic knowledge of German folklore, and it changed my life in ways they never could have imagined. My parents were German, born and raised in a small village near Munich, but they moved us to Australia when I was young enough to pick up the accent, good day, mate, and all that. I don't know why we left Germany. The topic was always hushed, brushed off with a quick change of subject, like smoke scattered by a gust. I learned early not to ask, but the secrecy clung to me, a shadow I couldn't shake. My bad behavior, my defiance, my sneaking, my destruction, forced my parents to get creative. They figured scaring me straight was better than grounding me, so they started spinning tales to keep me in line. It began innocently enough, a clever trick to tame a rebellious kid, but like all terrible ideas, it started with the best intentions. One evening, after I'd shoveled down a bowl of ice cream, my dad sat me down with a somber look. "Evelyn," he said, his voice low and grave, "I wouldn't eat so many sweets if I were you." I rolled my eyes, the impudent 5-year-old I was. "Why not?" He gasped, a theatrical tremble in his hand as he covered his mouth. "Because of the Zucker hex." I froze, hooked by the fear in his eyes, fake or not. He leaned closer, his tone a blend of sinister and whimsical, like a storyteller at a haunted campfire. The Zucker hex is an evil witch who eats children of all shapes and sizes. But her favorite treat? Kids who eat too much sugar. It makes them extra sweet, and when she catches them, she bakes them into a pie for supper. To an adult, it might sound absurd, but to me, it was as real as the chair I sat in. My dad's storytelling was so vivid I could feel the witch's breath on my neck, her gnarled hands reaching for me. I pushed my bowl away that night and swore off desserts for a week, my heart pounding at the thought of her lurking in the shadows. That was the first of many. The Zucker hex worked so well my parents leaned into it, thrilled with their success. Next came the Nachtag, conjured after I got caught reading under the covers one too many times. Dad described a creature that hid under children's beds, sleeping by day with its glowing orange eyes closed. At night, it woke, unfurling long, wispy arms. If you were asleep, it couldn't hear you, and you were safe. But if you were awake past bedtime, its bony fingers would sift through your hair before dragging you under the bed, never to be seen again. I started sleeping like a log after that, too terrified to even blink after lights out. My parents thought they'd cracked the parenting code, reinventing discipline with monsters instead of timeouts. Most kids got lessons from their parents. I got mine from the Zucker hex and the Nachtag. I spent nights paralyzed with fear, while my parents toasted their cleverness downstairs, clinking glasses to their brilliant scheme. Don't think they were cruel. They were desperate, trying to tame a kid who seemed determined to break every rule. They never imagined their fairy tale monsters would linger past their purpose, haunting me long after I'd outgrown the need for them. Most of their creations faded over time, their edges softened by logic and maturity. But one didn't. It sank its claws into my mind and held tight, refusing to let go. It started with the mosquito nets. When we moved to Australia, we learned the bugs here were a nightmare. Spiders the size of your hand, mosquitoes that left welts like bee stings. Leave a window open, and you'd wake up to a bedroom crawling with critters and your skin itching like fire. My frugal parents, strapped for cash after the move, draped heavy, cheap mesh over the windows to keep the bugs out. For 6-year-old Evelyn, this was a problem. The nets were ugly, blocking my view of the garden, making everything look blurry, like squinting through a dirty screen. I hated them. One night, Fed up, I grabbed a pair of kitchen scissors and sliced a gaping hole in the mesh, giving me a clear view of the stars and the flowers outside. The next morning, my legs were a throbbing map of mosquito bites, and my dad lost it. He knew I'd cracked the child locks on the windows, so there was no stopping me now. We were broke, barely scraping by, and replacing nets, or worse, windows, wasn't in the cards. It was the last straw. One day, as I sat on my bed, sulking, my dad came in and sat beside me, his face hard as granite. "Have I ever told you about the Blindenkralle, Evelyn?" His voice was different, colder, more serious than when he'd spun tales about the Zuckerhex or the Noctog. That's when the real nightmare began. "The Blindenkralle has no eyes," he said, his tone cutting through the air like a knife. "It can't see you, but its sense of sound and smell is extraordinary. Every night, it flaps its leathery wings, sniffing the air with its piggish nose, searching for children who leave their windows open." I swallowed hard, my imagination already stitching together a monster too horrible to fathom. He pointed to the window, his showman's flair in full force. "When a child leaves their window open, it smells their fear, hears their heart beating. It flies down, reaches in with claws as long as your arm, Evelyn, perfect for snatching children." His voice stayed firm, unyielding, the same tone he'd used when he told us we couldn't stay in Germany. "Once it has your scent, nothing can stop it. Not your mother, not me." It leans through the window with its long black tongue, its teeth bigger than a crocodile's, its breath like coal fires. "The only way to keep it out is to make sure it never finds you." He stood, closed the window, and clicked the latch shut. "So don't open it at night, darling. We only say this because we love you." The Zuckerhex and the Noctog were scary, but I always sensed they were stories, cautionary tales to keep me in line. The Blindenkralle was different. Its claws, its tongue, its eyeless face. They felt real, too real, burrowing into my mind like a splinter. I could hear its wings beating in the dark, the slurping of that awful tongue. Even on the hottest nights, I kept my window shut, terrified it would tear through the net like I had with my scissors. When my parents tried to reassure me, saying I was safe, I checked the latch after they left, the Blindenkralle crackling in the corners of my imagination. It was madness, being held hostage by a creature I'd never seen, but I couldn't shake it. What if I fell asleep and something opened the window? I lay awake, picturing those 10-inch claws curling around the frame, the monster's snout sniffing for me. My parents eventually noticed the toll it took. I heard them arguing one night, my mom's voice sharp as she berated my dad for going too far. "You scared her half to death," she hissed. My dad, sounding almost ashamed, mumbled that he hadn't meant for it to stick like this. Their wax wings had melted, and the Blindenkralle was waiting below, jaws open. No amount of coaxing, heartfelt talks, or therapy could erase it. They spent hundreds on doctors and pills, but the creature swam back to the surface, as vivid as ever. It took over a decade to scrub it from my mind, to convince myself it was just a story my cheap dad made up to save on mosquito nets. By 17, I was free, or so I thought. The anger came first, fury at my parents for planting that fear, but it faded. The Blindenkralle became a distant memory, a ghost I'd banished. The 7 years between then and my 24th birthday were the best of my life. I found friends who didn't care about my rebellious streak, dated a few boyfriends who made me laugh, and discovered a love for physics. Its empirical nature was a comfort, a world of concrete facts where monsters didn't exist. I moved to Sydney, got a degree, and settled into a modest flat in one of those high-rise buildings that look like filing cabinets. Life was good, normal, free of childhood terrors. But stories like mine don't end neatly, do they? A few weeks ago, Sydney was hit by a heat wave, the worst in years. The air was so thick you could choke on it, and my flat felt like a pressure cooker. I lay in bed, tossing and turning, my nightgown soaked with sweat, the room stifling. In a haze of heat and exhaustion, I leaned over and cracked the window open, just a fraction, letting a breeze drift in. For the first time in years, I felt relief, the air cooling my skin. I couldn't remember why I'd avoided opening that window at night. It was just a fog, a mirage born of the heat. As I drifted towards sleep, a rattling started, A faint whisper at first, like a distant hum, but it grew louder, closer, until it sounded like a metal ball bouncing inside a drum. My eyes snapped open, my heart pounding. The sound was alien, wrong, and then I heard something else, a soft tearing, one I hadn't heard since I was 6, when I'd cut through the mosquito net with scissors. It was the same sound, the ripping of mesh. My body froze, every muscle tensing as the tearing continued, then stopped. Something was outside, moving, clinging to the side of my 5th-floor apartment with impossible ease. My eyes adjusted to the dark, and I saw them, 3 scythe-shaped claws sliding through the window, attached to a raw, pink hand, its skin almost translucent, veins pulsing beneath. 22 years of repressed fear hit me like a freight train. I bit back a scream, my heart hammering so loud I thought it would give me away. The blinding crawl was here, made flesh. Its second clawed hand shattered through the net, gripping the windowsill. It leaned in, its wet snout wriggling, ears hanging slack, jagged teeth clicking where eyes should have been. Its face was a stretch of veiny pink skin, like spoiled meat stretched over a domed skull. The rattling came from its throat, a gurgling croak, like a dying man's last breath. Its jaws opened wider than any creature should, revealing that tongue, thick as my arm, forked, dripping with black, viscous liquid that smelled of burnt coal. Droplets fell onto my bed, staining the sheets as the tongue probed the air, tasting for my fear. I knew if I stayed, it would find me, devour me as it had in my nightmares. Adrenaline surged and I rocketed out of bed, hitting the carpet as the creature roared, slashing my pillow to ribbons. I saw its wings, leathery, cloaking its skeletal, gargoyle-like body, beating behind it before settling against its back. I bolted for the door, my sweat-slick hands fumbling with the handle. The blinding crawl lunged, clearing the room in half a second, its flesh cloak trailing behind. I slammed the door shut just as it reached me, trapping it in my bedroom. I stumbled across the living room, aiming for the front door, hoping the hallway would be my safe zone, like a child's game. But my foot caught on the carpet and I fell, twisting my ankle. Pain shot through me, and I bit back a cry, gripping my leg as tears mixed with sweat. The apartment was suffocatingly silent, except for my labored breathing. I stared at the bedroom door, still closed, and sobbed quietly, knowing it was only a matter of time. The door creaked open, and that awful rattling filled the air again. The blinding crawl's claws made meaty thuds as it padded toward me, its tongue slurping, searching. I felt a claw press into my shoulder, forcing me to the floor. I looked up, and there it was, its eyeless face twisted into a cruel grin. Its jaws hissed open, and that tongue dragged across my cheek, hot and wet, reeking of death. I don't know how I survived, but I woke in a hospital, bandages over my face. The doctors' voices hushed as they explained I'd never see again. They called it an animal attack, a freak incident, but I knew better. My parents came, their voices thick with guilt, apologizing for the stories, for the fear they'd planted. They didn't know, couldn't know, that the blinding crawl was real. I didn't tell them. What good would it do? I moved back in with them, unable to live alone, my world reduced to sounds and touch. The apartment was cleaned out, the window replaced, the net gone. But I still hear it sometimes, in the quiet of the night, that rattling, those wings, that tongue. It's out there, waiting, sniffing for another open window, another child who doesn't listen. I spent years trying to make sense of it. Was it really the creature my dad described, or something else, something older that his story accidentally summoned? I dug into folklore, using audiobooks and braille texts, searching for answers. German tales are full of eyeless monsters, creatures that hunt by sound and smell, but none match the blinding crawl exactly. Some said it was a demon, others a cursed spirit tied to the land. One obscure text mentioned a creature born from fear itself, feeding on the terror it inspires. That felt too close to home. Had my dad's story given it form, or had he known something he never admitted? I'll never know. He died last year, a heart attack, and my mom followed soon after, her grief too heavy. They left me their journals, written in German, which I'm still having translated. There are hints, vague references to why we left Germany, to something they saw, something they fled. Maybe they knew the blinding crawl was real. Maybe they brought it with them. I live in a new place now, a small house with no windows I can open. The doors are always locked, the air stale but safe. My friends visit less often, their pity too much to bear. I don't date anymore. How do you explain a monster that stole your sight? Physics, my old comfort, feels distant now. Facts can't explain what I've been through. I spend my days listening to the world, waiting for that rattling to return. It hasn't yet, but I know it's out there, flapping its wings, sniffing the air. I tell myself I'm safe, that it can't find me if I keep the windows shut. But at night, when the house creaks and the wind howls, I wonder if it's already here, waiting for me to slip, to open something I shouldn't. The blinding crawl changed me, not just by taking my eyes but by rewriting my reality. I used to laugh at superstitions, at the idea that stories could have power. Now I know better. Some tales aren't just warnings, they're invitations, summoning things we can't control. I don't know if my dad meant to call it, or if he stumbled into something older, something that was always there, waiting for a crack to slip through. All I know is that I'll never open a window at night again. And if you're reading this, if you're listening, take my advice. Keep your windows locked. Don't let it smell your fear. Because the blinding crawl is real, and it's always hungry. After the hospital, I tried to rebuild, but it's hard when your world is darkness. My parents' house became my refuge, though it felt more like a prison. I could hear their guilt in every word, every careful step they took around me. They stopped talking about Germany altogether, as if mentioning it might summon the creature again. I didn't push them. I was too busy learning to navigate a world without sight, relying on sound and touch to map my surroundings. The clink of a spoon on a plate, the creak of a floorboard, the hum of the fridge, they became my landmarks. But no matter how familiar the sounds, I couldn't shake the fear that the blinding crawl was listening too, its piggish snout sniffing for me, its claws ready to tear through the walls. I started having nightmares, vivid ones that felt more like memories. In them, I was back in my childhood bedroom, the window open, the net torn. The rattling would start, soft at first, then louder, until the blinding crawl was there, its tongue lashing out, its teeth gleaming in the moonlight. I'd wake up screaming, my parents rushing in, their voices trembling as they tried to calm me. They stopped mentioning the creature, but I could feel their regret, heavy as the air before a storm. I wanted to ask about Germany, about why we left, but I didn't. Deep down, I was afraid of the answer, afraid it would confirm what I suspected, that the blinding crawl wasn't just a story. I began researching, desperate for answers. A friend helped me access audiobooks and braille texts on German folklore, hoping to find something that explained what I'd seen. The stories were full of monsters, eyeless hags, winged demons, creatures that hunted by scent, but none were quite like the blinding crawl. One tale, buried in an obscure collection, spoke of a creature born from fear, a thing that fed on the terror it inspired. It wasn't named, but the description was close. A winged beast with no eyes, claws like scythes, a tongue that tasted fear. The text said it was drawn to those who believed in it, as if belief gave it form. That idea chilled me. Had my dad's story created it, or had he tapped into something real, something he'd seen back in Germany? I found his journals after he died. They were in German, written in his tight, precise script, and I had to hire a translator to read them. The entries were fragmented, full of cryptic references to the thing we left behind and the shadow that followed. He wrote about a night in Munich before I was born when he and my mom saw something outside their window, a creature with no eyes, its claws scraping the glass. They fled the next day, thinking they'd escaped it, but there were hints, scattered through the pages, that it had followed them, waiting for a chance to strike. The last entry, written a week before his heart attack, was a single line: "It knows where we are." I haven't finished the translation yet. Part of me doesn't want to, but I can't help wondering if they brought it with them, if it was waiting for me all along. I moved out of their house after they passed, needing a fresh start. The new place is small, secure, with windows sealed shut and heavy locks on every door. I don't sleep much, not because of the heat but because of the silence. It's too much like that night when the rattling started. I keep a radio on now, low enough to hear but loud enough to drown out any creaks that might sound like claws. My friends try to help, but they don't understand. They talk about therapy, about moving on, but how do you move on from something that's still out there? I don't tell them about the Blindenkralle. They think I'm crazy, and maybe I am. But I know what I felt, what I smelled, what took my eyes. I've thought about going back to Sydney, to the apartment, to see if there's any trace of it. My friend Sarah offered to go for me, to check the place, but I told her no. What if it's still there, waiting? What if it follows her? I can't risk it. Instead, I listen to the news, to stories of missing people, strange attacks, anything that might hint at the Blindenkralle. There's been nothing so far, but that doesn't mean it's gone. I think about my parents, about the guilt they carried, and I wonder if they knew. Did they see it in Germany and think they could outrun it? Did they tell me that story to protect me, or to warn me? I'll never know, and that's the worst part. The Blindenkralle isn't just a monster. It's a weight, a shadow that never leaves. It's the sound of wings in the dark, the smell of coal fires, the feel of claws on my shoulder. It's the reason I live in a house with no open windows, the reason I flinch at every creak. I used to think stories were just stories, that fear was something you could outgrow. Now I know better. Some tales are more than warnings. They're summons, calling things into being that should stay buried. I don't know if my dad meant to bring it to life, or if he stumbled onto something ancient, something that was always waiting. All I know is that it found me and it took my eyes. If you're reading this, if you're listening, do one thing for me. Keep your windows locked. Don't let it smell your fear. Because the Blindenkralle is out there, and it's always hungry.